On this very first episode of Black in the Stacks, I speak with the first African American woman to lead the American Library Association, Tracie D. Hall. Hall is not only a world class librarian, she is also an author, curator, and advocate for the arts. We spoke about the books that she's currently invested in, the state of Black librarianship, and share a very special moment that I'm sure will resonate with listeners as much as it did with me. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. So we'll just jump right in. What is your library story? So, how did you get involved with working in libraries? What pushed you to get your MLIS? Just tell us about yourself.
Well, I was a library user thanks to my family, especially my grandmother, as I've shared, previously, anytime anyone asked, my grandmother was one of those um, people who only came really out of the house, one of those Southern women who came out of the house for only really important occasions and like going to the doctor, going to take care of bills, going to church, those kinds of things. And when I was young, she made sure the library was on our rotation. So I knew just from how she used her time so economically and so intentionally that the library must be a really important place. And she helped me get my first library card. And those weekly visits were a part of the rotation. So I kind of grew up using the library and, because it was of value to my family. And then later on in college, I think it really was in college that I became more aware of the library as a formal space to continue one's education, because alongside the standard curriculum, that I was taking for my major and minor, I really turned to the library when I got curious about things and wanted to think. I think Ta-Nehisi Coates says this in Between the World and Me, when he says that the library was for him, that he really saw his opportunity to become a free thinker using the library. That resonates with me. And so I think before I even thought about librarianship, I was already a library user and really converted to the possibilities of what libraries could do in our lives, as well as supporting us in becoming free thinkers. But it was Sasha Orange, Marquita, who was then director of what is now the Office of Diversity, Literacy, and Outreach Services. At that time, it was the Office of Literacy and Outreach Services. She came to Seattle Public Library, where I had ended up after starting my early career working, directing shelters for people who were unhoused, especially youth. And I had seen a job offering at Seattle Public Library for youth services, senior program coordinator for youth services. And I thought, wow, these are like the two things I care about the most together, working with people who are unhoused and also libraries. So I applied, I ended up getting the job. And probably a year after that, Sasha Orange came to the library to speak and to meet with leaders there. And she came to I had this tiny little office. I mean, I think it was only like a bookshelf wide, really. But she knocked on the door, and I opened. Here's this tall, striking woman, and she says, I've been hearing about you and the work you're doing in outreach services, and I wanted to meet you. And she was talking about the youth outreach work I was doing, going to shelters for young people who are unhoused, going to group homes, trying to serve young people in foster care, and really trying to meet young people outside of the traditional sort of library and school spaces where we typically try to serve them. And she told me about the Spectrum Fellowship, and it was the first year of that scholarship to recruit um, uh, people of color who are traditionally, it's still today, not well represented in library services. And I think that evening, I looked into the program, I signed up, I applied to University of Washington Information School, which is where I graduated in 2000.
So it sounds to me like that
you are a true sort of believer and fighter for social justice. Is that fair to say?
Well, that's that seems to be what others say. I think I always try to be on the right side of history, and I always try to make sure that the institutions that I'm aligned with, that I'm supporting them and leading them in a way that ensures that, when history judges us, and to a greater or lesser degree, depended on your positionality, it will. Even if it's you looking in retrospect, I want to make sure that my time is used wisely and for the right things as much as I can. And I want to make sure that the institutions that I'm aligned with, the same.
So, speaking of history, by my count, you've made history at least twice. Do you ever feel pressure to continue being the first at something?
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, I feel more pressure making sure that I'm not the last at something, right? That's the pressure. You want to make sure that you want to make sure that you're a gate opener, and not a, sort of gatekeeper. I always try to, make sure of that. And even when I will tell you, I remember I rented an apartment in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, and it came to my attention, or was brought to my attention, that I was the first Black person that the landlord had ever rented to. This is back in the day when that was still a thing, and we know housing discrimination is real. But I remember hearing that, and I remember saying to myself, I'm going to try to set a standard so that this landlord feels like it's a good thing if they rent to people who look like me. I want to make sure that I represent, first of all, my home training, right? And I also represent the genius and the ingenuity that is present in all people. And so I don't try to be the first, but I always try to make sure I'm not the last.
As a history maker myself,
Yeah.
I've been asked that question, and I didn't really know how to answer it,
Mhm.
because it was never my intention to make history. It's just something that happened, um, and I I don't know if it's something that has helped or hindered my progress just yet. It's
Mhm.
something that I'm still kind of toying with. I spoke with another colleague in the field, and I shared with him that we were speaking about like awards and accolades, specifically in this library field, and specifically as a Black person in this library field. Um, that I felt like while my accomplishments were great, and yes, history making, it shouldn't have been such a history making feat. Like it should have been the norm.
Yeah.
Um, and I also feel like it has not done for me what I've seen it do for others. And I don't know if that's just my perspective, if that's just the way that the universe is guiding me right now on whatever this journey is.
Hmm.
Um, but it was interesting to hear him say that, what is it to be named a mover and shaker, right? In a field that very often does not support people who look like me.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
but that I should be proud of the things that I've accomplished and the things that I've done, because not everybody gets an opportunity to do so.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I mean, let's think about it. There are a lot of people who do incredible things and never win an accolade at all. I think about, people. I spend a lot of my time in Montgomery, between Seattle, where I teach at the University of Washington Information School, and also in Montgomery, which is a part-time residence for me. And one thing that I think about is that in addition to John Lewis and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, there are so many people who made such a huge difference, actually paved the road, for their um, breakthroughs, that most people don't know their names and they never won an accolade. So I think number one is that, we don't work for accolades. And then two, we don't expect accolades to do anything for us. Rosa Parks, as much as we, you know, hold her up as iconic, We know that she wasn't the first person, right, to refuse to sit in the back of the bus. She was a person who was able to get the breakthrough, but we also know that she had to leave Montgomery because even though we hold her up as an icon, she was never able, she and her husband, to gainfully work again in that town. She had to move to Detroit in order, to gain her likelihood, to gain a livelihood once again. And so we also know that Dr. King, when he was assassinated at 39, he didn't know that buildings would be named after him. Instead, he was being seen by some people as either not progressive and revolutionary enough, and by others as too progressive and revolutionary. So, a lot of even though he had won a Nobel Prize, but in a lot of ways that was symbolic. That was the rest of the world saying that we see the apartheid conditions that are happening in the US, and we disagree, and we support this leader of a movement, the larger movement that is pushing back against that. But, I think, at least for myself, I don't work for accolades, and many of the accolades or awards that may have come my way, to be honest, I didn't even know they existed. I really didn't. I didn't even know they existed until I was contacted. And I don't think of myself as more accomplished because they've been, I'll say, instead of awarded, assigned to me. I feel a sense of responsibility. And so it's just like somebody, the person who wins the new artist, Grammy. They shouldn't think, oh, I've made it. They should actually say, I have a lot to live up to. Right. And the person who doesn't win it shouldn't be dismayed or upset. They should say, I still have much more work to make. I may not get the new artist of the year Grammy, but one day I at least am going to work at a level where my work is Grammy, award winning. And so, let's leave awards and accolades in the, oh, okay, category. And let's just keep pushing, right? I mean, because it doesn't define us. It doesn't define us at all. And if getting an award or an honor is the highest thing you've ever done in your life, you still have a lot more to do.
So you've run down a lot of things that you are involved in. So with such a packed sort of resume, like, where do you even begin your day? Like, do you have any morning rituals? Do you have routines? Like, how does Tracie get her day started?
Wow. And it's different. It's different almost every day because, in these last few years in particular, I've been on the move. Like, I'm in New York now because I have work here and meetings here. And then I'm going to take the train back to Chicago for another meeting. And then I'll head to Seattle to begin our spring term. So days are different for me. I do try to begin in some type of contemplation. I try to wake up early enough so I can just think. I used to be a really big meditator. Like, I would be really intentional about that. For me now, it might just be quiet, a review of what I want to get accomplished in the day. So I always, Marquita, begin with that. What do I want to do today? And it's not just what do I have to do? It's what do I want to do? In addition to the things that I need to accomplish or obligations I have, what else do I want to achieve? So I'm always thinking about that. I always check my schedule. I always make sure I try to be in contact with at least 7 people a day outside of my traditional work. So it might be just a little note to someone about something that I've seen, or this morning, a note to a friend about a funny time. I have a lot to do in the next couple of days. And I remember once they planned a birthday party. This friend planned a birthday party for me, like in a few hours. And it was incredible. And I always say to myself, whenever I have a lot to do, because it took a lot of detail. And it was an act of love, but I think about that. And I always say, whenever I have a lot to do, I think about how this person was just so painstakingly detailed with what they did. and how it made me feel. And yet I know that they didn't have a lot of time themselves. So I would try to just be intentional, and I try to reach out, to people. I always try to read in the morning. I want to have a slow enough morning to read. So this morning I did a little bit of reading. That's important to me because I want to know what's happening in a day, what's happening in the world. And I also want to know how it matters to the things that I care about the most. So I always do a little bit of that. And then I would say that I have a real ritual of getting dressed, each day. I try to be intentional about that. It maybe the outcome is not always there, but I really believe that how we put ourselves together can determine how we feel. And so I really took some time this morning, nice, good shower, as well as really trying to groom myself. And, I come from a people that really believe that how you put yourself together shows your care for others. And so that's important for me.
You're the friend that threw the party kind of last minute. It sounds like they come from a creative background, or they just have that creative spirit. And it sounds like you surround yourself with creative people. I read an article, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing her name, but Jonice Starr Dunnigan, where she interviewed you, and you were quoted as saying, "What I've been interested in is what do Black women look like as creatives, artists, and as makers?" Have you figured that out yet? And do you consider yourself to be either a creative, an artist, a maker, or all three?
Yeah, and I think I was really sort of thinking about that because I really prioritize that, even in leadership positions that I've held. Sometimes the greater the leadership position, the more creative I allow myself to be outside of work, because it's so important to get the sense that you're building something. And that, I don't know why, I don't know how other people feel about this, but yes, I mean, I come from a creative family. They weren't artists outright making their living, but my grandmother was a quilter and a hat maker, and she really encouraged me being creative and being a thinker. As I've said, even though she had very limited education, very limited. One thing though about her, even though she hadn't really matriculated through school, I mean, she went to ninth grade, but in 3-year spurts. So she kind of went to the third grade, the sixth grade, and the ninth grade, because she came from a farming family that went to school in rotations. But by the time she was a young woman, she had kind of moved to town, so to speak, and she and her sister had enrolled in a millinery school. Can you imagine? They had enrolled in a hat making school, and she brought those forms and blocks for making hats with her throughout her motherhood and grandmotherhood. She was always buying like a hat that was maybe inexpensive and then just completely refashioning it. Hats were really important to her. And and she was creative. And when she was quilting, she would take over our big kitchen table and we'd eat other places in the house because, she was quilting. And so I think for me, agency, right? The ability to define oneself, to make oneself, to free oneself, that's really important to me. And so being a maker, yes, I make things. I don't as much as I did at one point, but every now and then I'll make something. I'm making a body of work around these chairs that have like this ancestral energy. And I was invited to be one of the leads featured artists in an exhibit last summer, and I made this piece, and it sold immediately, and I was very pleased that others saw it to be a value and were kind of like buying for it, and that made me feel like it had connected. So yes, I mean, I am still trying to always figure out what that looks like, because every new iteration, that I have, a new sort of space or stage, now entering, older age, entering young elderhood, I would say, it's important for me to keep making and to keep my mind agile enough to be curious And that's important, to me. And I think it happens at different stages. That you never run out of ideas. You're never too old to make. I don't believe anyone's not creative. I believe sometimes that we don't allow ourselves to find the things that really inspire creativity. And I think we can all be makers if we make the time, and also allow ourselves to have a space, because sometimes, busyness can sometimes be, the kryptonite to creativity. We should get things done, but leave enough time in our schedule, even if it's the wee hours, to ideate and maybe even create if we have that energy, that spark.
Wow, I'm thinking about so many things.
What comes up first?
That I have other stuff to create.
Yeah,
and now I have, and yeah, I have, I need to make time to create that. And I
Yes.
think as someone who has multiple jobs, as someone who is, a caregiver, a parent, the friend that, everyone calls when they need to vent or they need advice, making space and taking time to develop and create what is important to me, or just breathe, just have a moment of what do I want, or just silence, as you mentioned earlier. We're not even halfway done, and this is great. I could stop right here, honestly. But I won't. Because I told one person and she's like, no, you must ask all the questions. I'm like, fine, okay, I will ask all the questions. So switching gears a little bit. As librarians, we always get asked this question. So if you have one, what is your favorite book?
Wow. It's always like, a lot of times it's the last book, because the books I read, have everything to do with, what I'm thinking about and what's interesting me at the time. Wow. Right now I'm reading Race After Technology by Ruha Benjamin. And so I think that, I think that and Algorithms of Oppression by Sophia Noble and others like that, I think those books are important to me because I'm thinking a lot about the Black information future, the future of Black studies. That book is really, on my mind. I think is excellent, because I think we definitely in this post DEI, in this mandated post DEI, this imposed post DEI era, we have to think about what happens when the state is positioned in a way to be anti-memory, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be thinking about that. And we also have to be thinking about, and not in sort of like a buzzword way, what do we mean when we say community archives? What do we mean when we say community libraries? What do we mean when we say community record keeping? What do we mean when we say memory work, right? So I think any book that is sort of thinking about the post technological era, sort of when the state is positioned against memory, and I'm even thinking about the books that aren't written. And where do I step in writing into that space and into those voids? I mean, that's what's really preoccupying me. I don't know if it's favorite or what I'm preoccupied by right now.
Preoccupied is a good word, because someone recently asked me what I was reading, and I could not name just one. Like, I have a stack of books that I kind of float in and out of, which it is good or bad depending on how you look at. Well, not bad, but it because I can confuse like one thing in a story with another book because I'm reading so many. But yeah, I think we always want to be informed and aware of what's happening, but also develop time to protect our peace, especially as mentioned in this post DEI sort of arena.
Quickly, if you say like who are some of my favorite writers, I would say Gail Jones,
Okay.
Toni Morrison, Emerson, Thoreau. I was very much influenced by Thoreau and Emerson, and I still am. I was quoting Emerson the other day. A lot of transcendentalists, a lot of Black folks that speak from root or spirit. James Baldwin, Amiri Baraka, Sonia Sanchez as a poet, Borges as a poet. Yeah, so I have a lot of favorite writers who I read, like their catalog, if you will. I read, basically, down the bibliography. And a book that I still hold dear, from my childhood is Heidi, because she was, about her grandfather who didn't show his love externally, always or verbally, but showed it through acts and time spent with her. And that was a way that I experienced my grandfather, who I loved and adored. So the fact that the grandfather and a little girl are sort of the primary characters, when I was a little kid, that book captured me. And so that's kind of how I think about it.
What library in all of your travels have you visited that sort of left you speechless, not only with its design, but its offerings as well?
Man, oh, this is the best question, Marquita. Come on now. You got your girl here who loves libraries. You almost made me want to, I literally got to tell you this. I could feel like a little bit of tears or crying, popping up when you ask that, because I truly believe that when you step over the transom of a great library, you feel different, right? Oh my goodness, there's so many. Maybe I'll start outside of the US and come back into the US. I've visited a lot of libraries. When I travel, that's what I do. That's not the purpose of my travel, but I will make a quick detour to see a library. I think the Deichman in Oslo, Norway, captures how I feel today, literally, about the electricity that you can feel when you walk into a great library. One thing is that when you walk in and you kind of approach the information desk, if you need orientation, because you kind of see everything at once. You see all these floors and they have these like light rings going around, like electricity is really going off, and it's dark and light at the same time. And it opens up and it's expansive, but it's warranty. I mean, oh my goodness, you have all these things going on, right? That library made me feel, when I walk into it, a particular way. And then when they offered you a cozy to put your cell phone in, if you chose to have an immersive experience and allow yourself to just be in the library without the kind of distraction that we know we get from a cell phone, I couldn't take it. And then the children's floor, like the parents and the children were like, getting it on, like doing everything. And then there were these extraordinary places to read. That library, my goodness. I always said, if I could just expatriate somewhere just to use the library, that would be one of the places. In Mexico City, Vasconcelos, I know I'm mispronouncing, but that library, just in terms of its architecture, and the way the books are literally kind of hanging like grapes on a cluster, on a vine, that to me is extraordinary architecture. The Black Pearl in Copenhagen, Denmark, just makes you feel some type of incredible way. I was recently in Calgary. The library there, in terms of the reader in me, like all these different spaces to read in clusters, to read by yourself. That library stands out. In Utrecht, that stands out for me. There's so many. Here in the US, we have some extraordinary libraries. I was just in the Morgan, in New York, a private library, the intentionality, the book is object, the book is of value. It connects and connotes that. I think in terms of where the books I will say this, I will take photographs of books on shelves just to see the run. I will say that Enoch Pratt Library in Baltimore, in terms of their collection development, it's like pure gold on the shelves. I was in Salt Lake City. I felt that way too in their display, the Salt Lake City Public Library. I think in terms of the book as sort of like being in this tranquil space and transporting you, the public library in Reno, Nevada, with its like inside garden. Everyone, if you go to Reno, go there. And then in terms of the library interacting with the reader and being sort of empathetic to reading as a practice, a reading practice. I think Austin Public Library it has all of these egresses, the ways in which the staff are kind of embedded in sort of your desire paths, right? As architects say, the way you want to use the library. So you're not necessarily feeling like you're going to them. You feel like you're just encountering them on your journey, the way they've really made their teen room in terms of empathetic design. And I know I'm missing out on so many libraries, because New York Public, Boston, my beloved Chicago Public Library, and some of their extraordinary branches, like the Vivian, thinking about Woodson and the Vivian Harsh Collection. I mean, I could go on and on. I'm gonna stop myself here. So if a library wasn't mentioned, I'll have to talk about it in another place, because I think that one of our biggest assets in the United States, two of them are our parks, our public parks, and definitely our libraries. I just, sometimes I think about the wealth, what wealth means. And to me, the ways that I feel wealthy I feel wealthy when I have a place that's free and open to read and to think and to learn, and also to walk and to sit and to play. That makes me feel wealthy, because you don't have to even have a dollar to access those things.
Some of those places I've been, and some of them are on my to visit list. So
yes,
excited about that. What is one thing, or if you can't pick one, a couple of things, but what is something that you will always be proud of?
I think it is the time I spent with my mom before her death, the time I spent with my dad before his death, and the time I spent with my grandmother in the couple of years before her death, getting to know her as a woman, getting to know her as a young girl, as a young mother, hearing her stories. The time I spent with my aunt, though I think tending to people who are transitioning and hearing them out, those are the things I'm proud of in my life, proudest of.
What is the most surprising thing that you've learned about yourself?
That's a great question, because I'm still learning. Let me see here. One is how easily I'm transitioning into growing older, because I was the kid for a long time. I was a lot of times I was in spaces where I was like the youngest, right? The youngest, especially at work, or sometimes my various interests would place me in places where, I was the mentee to someone who was, much more accomplished and all of that. And I think I'm surprised that, I'm not pushing back against growing older. I don't look at myself as, less able or less, even though my body has changed and some of my abilities have changed. I don't know how I'm going to feel, 10 years from now, but I appreciate my journey. And I think sometimes when you're a woman, you're kind of taught that, as you age, you're supposed to regret that, but I actually welcome it. I see the changes in my face. I see the lines under my eyes, and I know how they got there. And I appreciate them. I am sometimes walking on a cane these days because, I have arthritis, which I really need to try to shift and change, with diet and new forms of exercise. But sometimes I have to be, on a cane. And I wondered how I was going to feel about that and how self-conscious, but not at all. I'm more interested in making sure that I have full mobility, but I'm moving, I'm moving so far into young elderhood graciously, and I love it.
What excites you these days?
Waking up.
Amen. Amen.
Hey, a new day, a new day. No,
Amen.
that's it. It's real simple. It's a new day, a new slate. Hey, being able-bodied, just like I said, being able to feel, touch. I mean, I'm at that level where I don't take these things for granted. I'm Generation X, on the kind of on the beginning end of Generation X, not at the very beginning, but right in there. And Generation X, despite all of the gains in with longevity and in healthcare, we can see the stress of being in this small generation, but a generation that saw the rise of crack, that saw HIV like really run rampant. A generation that has seen a lot of conflicts, if not wars. A generation that has seen three strikes, you're out. We are the generation that saw the rise of mass and over incarceration. We are the generation that experienced the recession recessions enough, so consistently that we were not expected to even do as well as our parents, right? So, a generation that saw that really inherited post-white flight neighborhoods. There's so much unnamed stress that Generation X has been on, and we're not taught to complain about, not taught to, say, oh, I'm just going to take an L. We're still the generation that you had to achieve through that. We had to, a lot of ways, raise ourselves because our parents, had to work, so much and multiple jobs. So we all had that key around our neck, coming in, cleaning up the house, learning how to cook, trying to raise our siblings because we were sometimes the only adults or older adults. That wasn't my situation because my brother's older than me. So in some cases, I had my brother being kind of like a parent in some ways and big brother for sure. But then in a lot of times I was raising myself at home. I had amazing parents and my mom especially, who raised me, my grandparents who were so consistent in my life throughout. But as I got into middle school and beyond, a lot of that was self-determination. And so I just don't take it for granted is what I'm saying. I don't take for granted that I'm here.
Um, so we spoke a little bit about like future work and what that looks like. As someone who is sort of educating the future of information professionals, because I think right now librarian is a huge buzzword right now in
Is
the
it?
state that I'm in Georgia. It is. They're throwing it out like it's taboo. It's just, oh, you're a librarian,
Oh,
so you're
oh, okay.
like
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I've I had a conversation a while with a former director, and we were talking about, does the word librarian sort of limit your opportunities to just being in the realm of either public or academic or special types of libraries, whereas something like an information professional or specialist has such a broad sort of concept that it allows you to kind of branch out. And my argument was it could be both. I've seen a lot of opportunity. I've had a lot of opportunities specifically because I had librarian attached to my name. But I've also seen where I've been kind of overlooked because I was quote unquote just a librarian.
Mhm.
And so as we think about the future of libraries and information access, do you have a vision of what you would want it to look like? And then, so like a future no holds barred, everything is wide open, all of this censorship nonsense is squashed and done, what is the vision? And then do you also have a more realistic sort of outlook for where we are right now? If that makes sense.
No, it does. And that's a great question. And I think, at the beginning, I was, wondering what you meant by librarian being a buzzword, but I hear what you're saying is that in some places being a librarian is seen as being in some ways like triggering or problematic position. And I think that in those places where being a librarian or being a teacher are seen as problematic, those are places that are engaged in a form of anti-intellectualism, right? Because in most cases you want to have a professional, because all of the degree says is that you have participated in a codified sort of curriculum, right? In a codified or standardized set or series, of learning and practice exercises that kind of standardizes your knowledge. That's what it says, right? And in a lot of places, whether you're a doctor or nurse, teacher, whatever, people want or they assume that your participation in that standardized body of knowledge sets you up to be able to be responsive and successful, in various types of settings, right? And so any place that says that's problematic, I wouldn't trust, right? Because I certainly wouldn't want to go into a hospital with an emergency in which they said, we did away with needing the degree, but everybody here is really interested in medicine. No, no, not at all. Please do not touch me. In that case, please don't. So I think that, we have to call it what it is. I'm pretty frank. And so I would say that, we are in a climate that is anti-intellectual. And I understand why is because abuses of power, people who abuse power are repulsed by people who have enough information to call them out. Right. And so I just want to call that what it is. But in terms of, right now in most states, you need to have an accredited, mostly American Library Association accredited library degree. And I think that the reason why we're seeing the dismantling of the Department of Education, of IMLS, attacks against the American Library Association, even before that, is because, we're in an era where power wants to, especially illegitimately gain power, wants to set itself up to have, very few detractors or very few obstacles. And let's face it, knowledge is an obstacle to abuses of power. So I think that, but on the other end, so I think the term librarian, and I think people who have library degrees, I think that they are critical to the practice of librarianship, and critical as memory workers, and critical for the dissemination of knowledge. On the other end, I think that having a library degree it's a master's degree, right? And so just like with any master's degree, I think you should use it in a way that, expands according to what your interests are. Spend as much time working outside of libraries as a grant maker in corporate social responsibility at a corporation, in nonprofit leadership as an arts administrator. I spent as much time in an association. I spent more time working outside of libraries than I have in them. And many times, when the master's degree I have 2 master's degrees, but I always say the master's degree that has taught me the most and has helped me make the most impact is the library degree, because I know how to get information quickly. I know how to navigate it. I am suspect of information that doesn't have, anything that credits it, or quotes that don't have an author or owner. There is a sophistication around information analysis, being able to read thoroughly quickly as we do. There's a lot of skill sets. I mean, we're not just we're not sitting at desks. There is a whole body of preparation, as you know, that equips one to be a librarian. And newsflash, those are some of the same executive leadership and executive functioning skills that prepare you to be, really an impactful leader in general. And so I'm all for, I'm not for euphemizing and saying, let's call people anything but a librarian if that's, what they're, if that's what, where they're working. But I definitely am for using your degree and letting it take you wherever you want to go.
I have thoughts, but I don't want them recorded. So we'll see. I mean, I could edit them out, like it's my stuff, but still, no. Before I ask my very last question, and I always ask this as my very last question, is there anything that we have not talked about that you want the people to know?
No, I'm following your lead, and I'm doing this because you asked. So your question, or whatever questions you have, are the ones that we should pay attention to.
Sounds good. All right. So this is my last, well, one of my last questions. So final question. What does life after libraries look like for you?
What does life after libraries look like for me? You mean if libraries no longer exist, or
in general? So I have, in addition, so I have two things. Like this podcast is Black in the Stack, so like Black people in libraries, right? Like actively. But I also do a thing called Life After Libraries, because while I work, as you've mentioned that you do as well, adjacent to libraries or in that realm, I am not actively in a library anymore. That's a whole another thing. But what does, and I've been trying to figure out like what is life after I've dedicated. For me, I have been, and I still count them, but like actively in libraries. I was 16 plus years into the field in various forms. I've been in public libraries. I worked for the Auburn Avenue Research Library down in Atlanta. I've been a school librarian. I am a learning experience librarian now, on a contract basis. So um, while I'm not in a system or a branch, I don't belong to a system or a branch anymore. I'm still very much in that world. Like I want to know what's going on. I am very active. I do participate. I was at a conference last year, speaking on a panel, but I've been trying to explore what is my life now that I am not, I don't want to say tethered, but I felt like I was, as a creative person, I felt like I was boxed in. And I tried to share that with my director, and it felt like it felt on deaf. Well, there was no feel. It fell on deaf ears. It was. I tried to explain that I was drawn to something else. Like I had a vision for the system that I was, my last system that I was in. And I felt like I was in a place where I could share that with that director. I had a plan, I had a proposal, like everything was set. I had answers to the questions like, well, if you do this and who's gonna do that, you know what I mean? Like I had it set. And I felt like I could share that with that person because we had that working relationship, or so I thought. And I didn't take it for granted. A lot of people, when I explained it to them, they thought that I I did that because that director also happened to be a Black woman. That was not the case. Um, but I did the work, right? Like I put energy and effort and time into presenting something that I knew would take this system from a level of just locale, right? Like within our little like area, and put it on a national and global platform. I was able to do that, but I had a plan to capitalize off of the program that I built to just catapult and get the funding that we deserve, the raises for staff, the additional staff that we needed to grow as a system. And the answer basically was, I hired you for a reason. You will do as I say, or you leave. And I left. But I've been trying to figure out, like, I'm still drawn to this field so very much because I do have like that service.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out what that looks like still. And I've asked other people like what it looks like for them. A lot of them will say, I've heard one person say death, right? Like he was like, I'm in it. I'm not going anywhere. He was like, life after libraries for me looks like the grave. Like they
Well,
gonna bury me. Yeah.
let me say this, and I'm listening to you, and you're a proof point, Marquita, that we sometimes arrive in certain places in our life, not by accident or mistake, but because sometimes the thing that we're calling is also calling us. And so when I listen to you talk about your experience within librarianship, it strikes me that you can do a lot of things, but that lens through which you see the world is going to include librarianship. And I think it's the same for me. And I also think it's important that we don't relinquish our goals and ambitions because it doesn't work at one institution. Sometimes people are really afraid of change, right? I used to joke and say, I used to joke and say to when I was younger, to my peer librarians, you know, there's very little that we can do
Hmm.
that would upset the apple cart in libraries. So we need to try all of it. And if it doesn't work in one institution, get to the place that it can. Or if it doesn't work at the level, that you are, then get to the front of the table or to the head of the table. And I would say for me, the only thing that interests me about leadership is my desire to see inclusion in institutions, is to see institutions go deeper in terms of service and impact. That's the only reason because I don't need leadership. I'm a creative person. I can do a lot of things without, 14 meetings a day. I can do a lot of things without, everybody looking at me when there's a problem. What are you going to do? Sometimes leadership can be isolating, right? Or without the judgment that comes from leadership. When even when you're not in the room, that people are talking about you, they're saying your name often, and sometimes attributing problems that you didn't make and you were nowhere near. You weren't even around sometimes when decisions were being made. In some cases, you weren't even thought of yet, in terms of just being born. Institutions also have, their time cycles. And when you're a leader, you inherit all of that. You inherit institutional artifacts and problems and issues. And sometimes you inherit the antipathy of people in the institution who just haven't liked leadership. So I always say the only reason why I say yes or may get interested in leadership positions is the opportunity, as I said before, to lead the organization to the better side of right, or to a former side of right, the firmer side of right. And also to test myself, because that stuff is hard. Leadership is hard. But I would say, I don't know, if you are, I don't know many librarians that do it for the money. There's some people who do it because they kind of have this this sort of wrongly placed idea that, librarianship might be easier than another job. But I think they're the same people that might get into education because they think it's easier to work with kids. As soon as you get into it, you realize the responsibility of educating another human being is formidable, and also taking in account the other kind of social or personal context, in which they're operating in. That stuff is so hard. And I would say librarianship can be extremely rewarding, but it is not an easy job if you do it right. If you're phoning it in, I don't know, because I haven't phoned it in. But if you're somebody who's really interested in the library as a learning hub for the school or the campus or for the community or the prison, then you know that it is a job that sometimes is very thankless, but it is a job that requires every brain cell that you have, and sometimes your ability to lift, to climb, to shape, to chip, to clean, to do all those things. So I would say that you never leave that work. When I've been an arts administrator, I've always been trying to work with the library, right? When I have been a grant maker, I've always been thinking about, how do we support the library as really the seat of especially of public learning in a city or region. So I don't think I've ever left the library, though I've mostly worked outside of the library, and I don't think I ever will, especially today that we're exiting the information age and we're entering the post information age, or what I would call the not only the disinformation age, but really an age of of a certain type of politicized or weaponization of thinking, right? In what society are you against people because they're awake? Isn't being awake and being engaged the foundation of a democratic society? So I don't think I can afford, personally, as a resident, as a citizen, a resident of the cities that I live in and spend time in, as a citizen of this country, I cannot afford to leave. Forget about me being a librarian. I can't afford to leave libraries. If anything, I need to be more invested in libraries than I've ever been, and I need to encourage others too. And I want to encourage you. I want to encourage you to make sure that when people say no to an idea that you have, that doesn't disincentivize you. It causes you to really inspect it yourself more deeply. And also to understand that no plan can be successful without buy-in on some level. Either you get buy-in from your peers or the people that you're going to be supporting, or you get buy-in from above. Buy-in from above, not getting that is not the end of the story. Sometimes if you're being blocked, is really a sign to go to another institution where you're going to be welcomed, and where your ingenuity and your level of engagement and deep care are welcomed. Never let one institution or one no stop you, and certainly don't allow it to lead to push you to leave librarianship. In fact, more of us need to come to librarianship. More of us need to come to our libraries. This is the time to really assert the power of memory, the power of imagination, and the power of knowledge.
It sounds like life after libraries for you is just more library stuff. Just more libraries.
Well, life after library is ensuring that we're leading a life worth living. And for me, a life worth living is, I think it was Socrates who said, the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think libraries are really sort of that space where concentrated examination happens and is encouraged.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all of your insight. Thank you for being you, and thank you for being so willing to speak with me today.
Take care, okay?
All right, you too.
Okay, bye-bye now.
For more information, you can find us online at blackinthestacks.com. That's BLACKINTHESTACKS.com.